Excellent, thank you.
Just one point. I was saying, if you can just repeat the questions.
Okay, yeah. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's nice to see the live people also. I think I left off last time with a question on the Rishonim that understand our Gemara to be referring to the same scenario as the Yerushalmi. So our Gemara says, a member of Rabbi Hashof bein Amudim b'Shabbos chayv mishum Memachek, and the Rabbeinu Chananel and the Rosh and others compare this statement to the Gemara to the Yerushalmi. Says and the problem is that the Yerushalmi and the Bavli don't seem to be saying the same thing. The Yerushalmi is a useful maramokum for understanding what the Bavli means, and is a good attack on Rashi, because the Yerushalmi says the same scenario as Hashof, and he clearly says it means the Oros, not the ground in between, which is how the Rishonim understood, some of the Rishonim at least understood. So the Yerushalmi is a good trigger for us to understand Hashof bein Amudim to mean that you're using the pillars to smooth the rather than to trample and smooth the ground. However, the Yerushalmi doesn't say that, because the Yerushalmi says this is the melachot that was in the Mishkan, whereas the Bavli says it as a memra of an Amora, as a separate halacha, shum Memachek. It doesn't sound like from the Bavli that this is the classical dogma of Memachek. That was the question that we left off. And Yerushalmi use the same language, and to say that the Bavli means like Rashi, nothing to do with the skin but just trampling on the ground, is also difficult. Thought the Bavli is a good source for saying we're talking this. Nonetheless, the Bavli seems to say this is the core malacha, whereas the Yerushalmi seems to say this is the core malacha, whereas the Bavli just seems to say this is a member of an Amora. So that's why I left it last year, I think. And I was sort of puzzling over. In the meantime, off group, Adam was pushing me both at the end of Shiur and then afterwards about what exactly is what is the classic scenario of Memachek. And he correctly pointed out that Rashi on the Mishnah, if you look at Rashi on the Mishnah on Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, which lists the melachos, and the Rambam in Perish Mishnayos says the same thing. They both say that the classic melacha of Memachek is Megar Esah. Rashi in the Mishnah says Memachek Megar Esah, and the Rambam says Moichei Hamavim Menas Aseh. So both of them say that you're removing the seah, the sah of the leather. So an animal hide has hair coming from it, and if you remove the hair, that's the smoothing that we're talking about for the melacha. So if this is the melacha, then we sort of, I mean, maybe this gives us an indication of why shof bein Amudim isn't necessarily always the classic melacha. Maybe this, I don't know what to make of this. Maybe there's two ways of doing it. Sometimes you use shof to remove the seah, which is the av melacha, and sometimes you're just trying to smooth it, which is the tolda. Not very satisfying, but I'm just pointing out that at least the Rishonim and the Bavli don't seem to learn that shof bein Amudim is the classic of the Mishkan. They seem to say it's about removing the seah, unless that's what you're doing, bein Amudim.
Would it be because it's bein Amudim rather than al gabe?
No, I'm not making any diuk in the language. I'm just saying that the Rishonim, Josh just asked, am I making a distinction between the shof bein Amudim al gabe? No, I'm just pointing out that Rashi and the Rambam and the Mishnah seem to say that the classic melacha is the removal of the sah. In which case, I'm asking more than saying anything with great conviction and clarity. Is removal of the sah the same as shof bein Amudim? If it isn't, then maybe, or is shof bein Amudim always just remove the hair, or is it also a smoothing process besides that? So I don't know. No, but I didn't mean a nuance of the language. I'm just questioning what the melacha is and whether the Bavli understands the melacha to be removing hair and whether it's always what shof bein Amudim does. Sorry, Karen.
No, I'm just saying that Megara means to slice or plane, and
shaf is usually to polish or smooth. The indication of megara is a removal of something, and a shaf is not necessarily removing, you're smoothing something.
Who says megara? Where do you get that? I mean, the Gemara later says megara.
I thought that was Rashi in the Mishnah, wasn't megara.
Oh, it is Rashi on the Mishnah, right? Rashi also says megara.
There's one seems to be the malacha.
Right.
Discussing what's the.
Rashi does say megara. I hadn't focused on that.
Is to surely you have to remove something or maybe add something on, but to just play around with what's already there and rearrange.
Right. So I will come on. So Karen's asking for those online about the Lashon of Rashi of megara. I hadn't actually focused on that Lashon. This always ends up. I end up underlining every word. So I've underlined the word saroi. Under Karen's influence, I've now underlined the word megara also, because it's a good point. Rashi does use the language of megara. Karen is arguing that the word megara implies removing something as opposed to shof, which is more about smoothing. And maybe there's something that we need to think about removing the body of something, or removing the something that's like an addendum to the body, an attachment. I will come on to a similar chiluk later. I didn't focus on it here because I'd missed that Rashi used megara. I focused on it in the continuation of the Gemara, which talks about megara rosh sois, and there the Gemara doesn't say that it's memachek. The Gemara says it's mechatech. So I'm going to put Karen's comment on hold because I'm not sure that your intuition about how to translate the word is correct. However, your ha'ara is right. We should have noticed Rashi says megara, which is planing, the different language. What to make of that, I don't know either. So I'm afraid lots of I don't knows here. Yeah.
Is there any answer to the point made that if it's mishum, then it's got to be something different? I mean, if the Mishnah is saying the classic case, the Gemara doesn't need to just repeat that. So it's coming along and saying something different and saying mishum, yachad mishum, that not the actual melachot.
That is the answer, but that's a rephrasing of the question, meaning we know the Gemara is different to the Yerushalmi seems to say the core melacha is shaf bein amudim. The Bavli says mishum, i.e. that's not the core melacha. The question is, so at least two questions. One is the Rosh and the Rabbeinu Chananel seem quite content with using the Yerushalmi to explain the Bavli, when to us it looks like the Bavli is not identical to the Yerushalmi. And secondly, if the Bavli is not identical to the Yerushalmi, then what does the Bavli think is the core melacha? All I'm commenting, which I don't know if I can give the dignity of an answer, I'm calling it an answer, but it's our point, is that Rashi and the Rambam and the Mishnah both tell us what the core melacha is, which is it's megara, the sar, it's removal of the sar. How that relates to shof bein amudim, and is that the answer to why the Bavli doesn't consider it the core melacha is anyone's guess, but maybe if megara sar is the core melacha, then the Bavli knows that shof bein amudim is not the core melacha. We could speculate on other chilukim. I'll mention some other possibilities one can say, but I don't really have any clear rayas or answers to this question.
Edgar, so we were debating it, and one thing that Edgar sort of brought out was the fact that although in the Mishkan, the Yerushalmi makes it clear that what they did is they did this shaf bein amudim or ala amudim, that doesn't make it the core malacha, because just as we had Sedura de Pat, where the core malacha was not on where you cooked the salmon or whatever, as opposed to the bread. So here, this is Sedura de Kativa, and Sedura de Kativa means the core activity you're doing here is removal of hair, and therefore it's different to what was done in the Mishkan, because it's the Sedura de Kativa.
Okay, so I'll repeat that for those online. It's an exceptionally fine point, but it doesn't answer our question. Meaning, so Adam Edgar are pointing out that the Mishkan, what happens in the Mishkan isn't identical to the list of melachos in the Mishkan, a list of melachos in the Mishnah. So let me just remind everyone of this distinction. So the Mishnah arranges them in order of mundane, creative human activity, not building of the Mishkan. However, each melacha has a parallel in the building of the Mishkan. So, for example, in the Mishkan, baking in the building of the Mishkan and the preparation of the Mishkan, baking didn't take place, boiling took place. He used to cook the herbs for the diyai. The Mishnah lists baking because the Mishnah lists the first 11 melachos as Sedura de Pat, as preparation for bread. Similarly, in the Mishkan, the leather processing that took place was to create the skins that went over the Mishkan. In the Mishnah, is not about creating skins to go over the Mishkan, it's about human needs, and it lists it as Sidura de Ketiva, creation of writing material, preparing parchment for writing. And you see that in the structure of how the Mishnah lists it. So it's possible that Rashi and the Yerushalmi, or the Rambam and the Yerushalmi, go together. In the Mishkan, the classic way the Malacha was done was Shof Bein Amodim, and in the Mishnah, the classic example of the preparation of leather for writing material is removal of hair. And two aren't identical. That's a point. Nonetheless, possible that the classic example in the Mishnah is a Tolda, not an Av. So Lamaisa, all said and done, the Yerushalmi tells us the example of the Mishnah is Shof Bein Amodim. The Bavli says that's a Tolda, not an Av, if we're reading the Bavli correctly. And it's a Chiddush of a Din of an Amora, whereas if that's what took place in the Mishkan, there's no Chiddush of Din in that. So it may be a resolution as to why the Rambam and Rashi give a different explanation of melachot to the Yerushalmi. It still doesn't answer our question, which is how can the Bavli say it's a Tolda if the Yerushalmi claims that's the classic melacha? Even if Mishum is the wrong language and it's a Ko'av, it's a funny thing that you have a statement of an Amora to be Mechatech Halacha when that's actually, according to the Yerushalmi, the way the melacha took place in the Mishkan. So I don't really know a way out of this trap, and I surrender at this point. So. Over to you, Rabbi Zobin. I know that's what I have to say on it. There are other answers you could give. I mean, you could, for example, say the distinction is whether you're using a keli or using yad. For those who are here right at the beginning of when we began learning Shabbos, we looked at some of those kolukkim in with respect to the difference between the various forms of sieving. The implement you use could define whether something is an av or a tolda. So if you use a sieving device, then that's the Av, and if you pluck and separate out bit by bit, then that's the Tolda. I can't remember if I printed it, but in the Rambam, I think I printed on the source sheets, the Rambam. So the Rambam also seems to say this is a Tolda, not an Av. No, he says Mechatech. I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. I didn't wait. Where's the Rambam on where did I put the Rambam? Halacha, sorry, correct, yes. So the Rambam says, "Hashof biyodoi on the or am chayv b'shemoichik." So the Rambam, sorry, thank you. So that's the end. The Rambam ends of Halacha Vav. So why does the Rambam add in that you're shof biyodoi? So maybe that's the Rambam's resolution between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli, or at least an explanation as to why it's only a tolda. And the Rambam's answer as to why it's only a tolda is because you're doing a biyodoi. You're not using a plane or a smoothing implement or something of the sorts. Now, again, the Rambam in Brisk Yuzeh, the Rambam's not just supposed to exhaust the Mefarish. So the Rambam, when the Rambam quotes a Gemara and adds in a word, that's quite significant. He's adding in his commentary on the Gemara. So for some reason or other, the Rambam is quoting our Gemara, quotes a Bavli, and he adds in a word, biyodoi. So he's acting as a Mefarish, something that he feels needs explanation in the Gemara, and he's adding in it, biyodoi. In addition, if he's adding in that word, he feels it's halachically significant. It's not just an explanation of the Gemara, he feels it's something you have to understand. So for some reason or other, he only understands our Gemara as being biyodoi. Why? So we don't work. A possible answer is because he's explaining Tolda. The problem is I don't find it a very convincing answer because there's no clue in the Bavli or in the statement of the Amora of Achaba Chanina that's his chiddush, that it's biyodoi. If you're shof with an implement, you're chayiv min haTorah, and that's the classic melacha in the Mishkan as per the Yerushalmi. And an Amora wanted to be Mechatech, that you're even chayiv biyodoi, and that's a tolda. You'd have expected him to say biyodoi. If that's an important halachic detail, you'd want him to mention it. So again, it's a possible distinction that the tolda is biyodoi, the av is with an implement. There's no remez in the Gemara to that distinction. The Rambam makes us think about that difference, but we're left puzzled where the Rambam got that from and why he thinks it's significant that it's biyodoi, not with an implement. So just to summarize what we're saying, so this isn't a complete tangle. We have a Yerushalmi that says the Av Melacha is Shof Bein Amudim. We have a Bavli, which according to Rashi has nothing to do with that. It's about smoothing ground, great. But according to other Rishonim, is talking about Shof, including in that list of Rishonim, we should include the Rambam. and we don't know what makes our scenario a statement of an Amor and a Tolda, and the Bavli an Av. Maybe there's Machlokes Bavli and Yerushalmi, could be, because Amor is different to the Yerushalmi, and that would explain Rashi and the Rambam, who say that Memachek Minatorah is removing Sar. Possible other distinction is Biyodo. The Rambam seems to draw that distinction, but again, we don't know where he gets that from. That's a summary of my current state of confusion in the Gemara. Yeah.
Just a question. The Lashon of the Rambam says Biyodo, but the Lashon of the Rosh says Biyodo al Gavei something. Do we that mean to say that the Rosh's understanding is different from the Rambam, or would the Rambam include the Biyodo, but obviously on something?
I think the Rosh says that's the wrong gives.
It says gives and Mechatech.
He says gives and Mechatech, and then he comes. That's comma, and then he comes to attack the continuation. The Mechatech Shayach ba im Mechatech Biyodo. If it's Mechatech Biyodo, what Mechika is there? So Rosh is saying that the way to.
Sorry, that isn't it. You got like a bit of leather, and your hand, you're rubbing it on top of this thing. Sure, that's Mechika.
No, that's not the reading of the Rosh. The Rosh says as follows. We're not exactly sure how to read the Rosh either. We struggled with the reading of the Rosh, but we think the reading of the Rosh is as follows. He brings Rashi, he then brings the Rach and the Yerushalmi. He says, this is correct. And my proof that this is correct, and it doesn't mean Mechika Biyod, is because Mechika Shaykh Be, Meshashik Biyod, Al Gabe Evan, Al Gabe Nesa. Where's the Mechika if you're just rubbing your hands on I guess, several thousand years, you would smooth a stone by rubbing it with your hand, but it will take a long time for this to happen. What mechika is there by rubbing your hands on a plank or stone? That's a ridiculous way of doing the mechika. So the Rosh is coming to attack.
That's exactly the mechika that the Rambam.
Maybe yes, maybe no, because the Rambam doesn't necessarily mean that you're rubbing with your hands on it. He might mean.
Because I would understood the other Evan is that you've got a stone,
right.
You've got the thing you want to rub, and you put your hand on the thing you want to rub, and the stone is the thing called the smoothing. It's not with your hand itself, it's called the smoothing.
You know what? I think you might be right. I think you're correct, and I think this is what the Rambam means. And I think you've answered the question. This ha'ara that a few of you were making, and I sort of ignored. I think I've messed up here. The Yerushalmi says Hashaf al Gabi. That means you're using the stone to do the smoothing. That is the Av. The Tolda is not al Gabi but Bain, and the Rambam explains that to mean you're using your hand, and therefore that's the Tolda, and that's the answer of where he saw in the language of the Amora that you're doing it biyodoi. And I think you're correct that the Rambam therefore is a head-on clash with the Rosh. What the Rosh said is ridiculous, is what the Rambam is saying. The Rosh said ma mechika ika, and that's exactly what the Rambam is saying. Yeah, that's what I mean by the mechika. Yoshof biyodoi. So I think you're right. So sorry, I completely missed this, and I also completely your diuk about al gabi and bain. I didn't take that seriously, that diuk, but I should have taken it seriously. So the Rosh says that shof. So 2 points. First of all, the Rosh says shof biyodoi is a ridiculous mechika, and the Rambam says this is mechika. The answer to the question, by the way, is because the Rambam's talking about shof biyodoi on and the Rosh is talking about shof biyodoi on stone or a plank. For some reason, that's how he understood Rashi. So shof biyodoi on the Rambam says is a good mechika. We then asked a question, and we said maybe the Rambam is adding the word yodoi because that's what makes it Torah. And we asked, where did the Rambam see that? So the Yerushalmi uses the same word and doesn't say that. And where does the Amora, Reb Acha, stress that point that you're shof biyodoi and nonetheless a chiddush that that's a Torah? The answer is because it says bein hamudim. You're not doing it on the hamudim. You're just doing it bein hamudim. You stretch it out bein hamudim, and you stretch it, which is exactly what the Rambam says. Hashof biyodoi matuach bein hamudim. I should have underlined the word matuach, not just the word biyodoi. You have skin. So basically, the Yerushalmi says that if you are shof the Evan, if you smooth something out using the stone, it seems as a implement for your smoothing needs, then that is the of, and that's what took place in the Mishkan. And the Rambam read the Gemara to be the Bavli to be saying that if you stretch a skin between amudim and you rub it with your hand, that is the Tolda. Very nice. Okay, so we've got somewhere. That's brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so I hope that's. I'm not sure I'm clear on all this. I need to discuss on the sukkah, but it seems that the Rambam is saying the Bavli is different to Yerushalmi. The Bavli is stretched, taut skin between pillars, rubbing with your hand, and that's a Tolda. The Yerushalmi is rubbing on the stone, which is using an implement, which is the Av and what happens in the Mishkan. And the Rambam, to make that clear, adds in not one word, but two words, Shaf biyadai al ahar hamotzuach bein hamudim. And I should have noticed that the Rambam is stressing the point. You're not rubbing on the stone, you're rubbing on skin stretched, bein hamudim, stretched between stones, and that is the Toldah. The Rambam doesn't bring the Yerushalmi, to the best of my knowledge, but the Yerushalmi scenario is different. It's al-Gabi or Evan, and that's the Av. Okay, all of this again, I repeat again, though, we're still left in a mess with Rosh. Right? Rosh is the whole problem because he says Shaf ben Amadim is a completely different scenario. But the Rosh, the Rabbeinu Chananel, claims the Yerushalmi is a good source to explain the Bavli, and we're still left wondering, because the Bavli is different to the Yerushalmi. The Bavli is an Av, the Yerushalmi is the Bavli is a Toldah statement of an Amora, the Yerushalmi is an Av and a statement of what happened in the Mishkan. So the Rosh's big attack on Rashi and perhaps even the Rambam, we don't understand. We're left puzzled. What exactly is he bringing from the Yerushalmi? Okay, at least we've come out with something clear from that. Excellent. Okay.
Is it definitely an Av because it was done in the Mishkan? So, sorry if that's a silly question. Could it still be a Toldah?
I don't know if you were on Edgar before when Adam quoted you and asked this question.
Yeah, I was. But could it be that even though it was done in the Mishkan, it's still a Toldah, or is that ridiculous?
I wouldn't dare label anything as ridiculous because I don't know enough Torah to say that. It doesn't appear to me to be a reasonable suggestion.
Okay, because mathematically it might work. Then,
Mishkan, that's what we mean by an Av.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that we saw that those who were here again right from the beginning, we did discuss a little bit what made an Av and a Toldah, and the little bit of sanity I've got on this figure that I thought was clear is that if it's in the Mishkan, then it's the Av. Tosfos sort of spells this out, by the way. If those who want a Maramakum or have a little bit of spare time to do a little bit of extra learning, have a look at the Gemara on Ein Daled Amud Aleph and Tosfos Divya Maskell Shekain, where he sort of, this is sort of an important Maramakum around these points of the Mishkan. If you want to do a bit of Chazar, if you look at the Gemara at the bottom of Ein Gimel on the base and the top of Ein Daled Amud Aleph, that's the Maramakum where we chapped two pieces of information. Number one, that the Mishnah and the Mishkan are not using the term melachot in the same way. And you can have something taking place in the Mishkan and something taking place in the Mishnah, and one is dealing with human needs and one is dealing with Mishkan needs, and it's also the source of this seemingly the one bit of information I thought we were clear on, which is if it's in the Mishkan, then it's an Av. So yeah. I'll just use the remaining time available, even though it's only a short amount of time, but I just want us to move on a little bit to begin dipping our toes into the next line of the Gemara. So the next line of the Gemara means so now come on to another melacha, the melacha of Mechatech, I guess I'll just say short to R on this, given that we've only got 3 minutes, just a short question and answer. So I hope I printed in the sources, I did, Rashi, the Gemara in Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. And the Gemara in Kuf Gimel Amud Beis just has a few words. Hamagara Kol Shehu Chayev, says Rashi, Hamagara Klumsois O Kalfim, Dahavi Toldah Memachek. So the Gemara in Kuf Gimel, as explained by Rashi, says that if you're Magara Klumsois B'Shabbos, Chayev Mishum Memachek, and our Gemara says Chayiv Mishum Mechatech. So what is the difference between Mechatech and Memachek? Memachek is smoothing things down, trimming, and Mechatech is cutting things down, which is also a form of trimming. Our Gemara says that Magara means planing, I think. Planing is smoothing. So our Gemara says that you can smooth something down to size and be chayiv mishum mechatech. We will have to look at, not this week, but on Sunday, Mi'at Hashem, the difference between mechatech and korea. Korea means tearing and mechatech means cutting. I mean, what's the difference between the two? We looked at korea already once when we did Toifer and korea, the twin melachos. We'll have to revisit and do a bit of chazara on what korea is, and I printed the long Halacha. By the way, for those who haven't yet seen it, I put in bold the Halacha's quote of the Yerushalmi in the middle of the Halacha. He quotes Yerushalmi that asks the difference between Mechatech and korea. So have a little look at that line in the Halacha where the Yerushalmi gives an answer which isn't entirely clear, but it discusses the difference between Korea and Mechatech. For those who are short of time, don't learn through the whole Halacha, just have a look at that key bold statement. But here we're asking a different question, which is what's the difference between Mechatech and Memachek, particularly because the Gemara says that you can plane down a surface, and that would be called Mechatech. An implement that we're using to open up this question, the crowbar to crack open this question, is that Rashi himself really raises this question, because Rashi on the Gemara in Kuf Gimel defines planing something down as Memachek, when our Gemara clearly says the same scenario of planing something down as Mechatech. And I think the answer to this question is that there's a difference between Megare Roshi Klunsois and Megare Klunsois. When you are planing Klunsois, pillars, down, you're planing them to smooth them. And therefore Rashi says that is Memachek. When you're Megare Roshi Klunsois, you're planing them down to shorten them, to level them off, to get them to a particular height, which is Mechatech. So that would be a suggestion of the difference. When I'm trimming something down in order to shape it to size, it doesn't matter whether I'm Mechatech with a knife, the way you cut leather, or with scissors, the way you cut leather, or with a plane, and that's the point of the Gemara. Either way, I'm trying to trim it down to size. So trimming something down to size is Mechatech, whether you plane it or whether you cut it. Planing something in order to smooth it, that is Memachek. So it would appear to be the Pshat, and that's a useful foundation for us to, Mitzvah Hashem on Sunday, move on to the difference between Mechatech and Korea, and then on to the continuations again.
Why wouldn't you be Chav?
Because the question was, why wouldn't you be Chav Shtayim? It seems the two melachos are mutually contradictory. What is your aim in planing it down? Is your aim to get it to a specific size, or is your aim to make sure it's smooth? You could imagine a scenario where you're trying to do both, but lav dafka, you always, maybe in one case you're just interested in it being smooth, another case you're interested in it being a certain height.
If you have in mind both, you could be Chav both.
And if you have in mind both, you could be a Chav both, yeah. So it would appear. Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop there for today, and hopefully Sunday. I'm starting into a bit of chazara on this based on this these hours. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I wish everyone a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Thank you.